you about the effects that light can have on our mood and on our energy and general health. When I was younger, when I was studying naturopathic medicine, I had an ongoing debate with one of my good friends who I was studying with, and we were standing on opposite sides of the debate. I was for the point of view that what happens in our mind and psychologically has the most bearing and effect and influence on our well-being, whereas he was saying that whatever we do on the physical realm has a greater and most influential effect on our well-being. Now, 35 years later, after quite a few years of experience working with people and observing, I can truly say that our well-being comes from both mental and physical and environmental, many aspects. So I'm just choosing one of those aspects, which is light. However, it is of great importance, one that most people underestimate. Before I progress into the world of light, I'm just going to touch on 3 of the basic main reasons, physiological reasons, why we might have low energy and low mood, and on a more extreme level, depression. So there are 3 main causes which contribute to this. And the first cause is inflammation. And more scientists are starting to come to realize that inflammation is at the core of virtually every chronic illness. And that includes diabetes, arthritis, even cancer, and depression. So there was a few studies done, and one of the studies induced a certain type of inflammation in people that they were studying by giving them a drug that would cause inflammation so they could observe them. And within a few days, virtually everyone in this group had developed depressive symptoms. And as well, people with hepatitis C are treated with a drug called interferon. It's a pro-inflammatory drug. And in one study where they gave subjects with hep C this drug, within a couple of days, everyone was manifesting signs of depression, and many of them were clinically depressed. So that's just an example of how inflammation correlates with depression. Of course, there's many ways that we can actually address inflammation, and one of the best ways is actually through diet, but I'm not going to go through that today. There are ways, which I'll touch on later on, that we can use light as an anti-inflammatory. The second most common cause for depression or low mood and low energy is thyroid conditions. Many more people actually do have an underactive thyroid than laboratory and statistics actually show. And one of the reasons for that is that our method of testing is becoming outdated. It's based on old information, old reference ranges, which is now being challenged as being actually incorrect. And when people come into my clinic and I ask them certain questions to see about their low mood and low energy, I always ask them about their thyroid, and most invariably I usually become a bit frustrated because their thyroid tests only take one measurement, which is TSH, it's thyroid stimulating hormone, whereas in fact to get a really good understanding of what's going on, we do need active T3, T4 and also antibodies in the thyroid. And the reference range for TSH has now been challenged as being too large. So looking at your thyroid condition is actually a really important part of the process, and it can be quite easily fixed without needing to go antidepressants or other methods. And there are some very effective ways to stimulate the thyroid function using light, which I'll touch on a little bit later on. The third main cause for low mood and low energy is sugar imbalances. And this is huge. So many of us love sugar, and it's also highly addictive. I had one friend, a good friend of mine, who has a daughter who's 18 years old, and her daughter does suffer from quite strong anxiety and depression and very, very low energy. And once they came to stay in my little studio for a few days, and after they left, I noticed a strange little thing. I noticed that the honey jar, because I don't have sugar in the studio, had gone from being virtually full to virtually empty. And I never said anything about it. But later my friend said to me, my daughter really struggles with being addicted to sugar. And all of a sudden I realized, aha, there was no sugar in the studio. So she needed the honey, and she virtually had the whole jar during 4 days or so of being there. Now that's just an interesting little story to demonstrate the correlation between sugar imbalances and mood and energy imbalances. And I highly recommend, if anyone does have any of those conditions, to go on a sugar-free diet. And that's also an anti-inflammatory diet. So they're the three main causes. So let's come to the world of light. Most people don't realize that light is so essential for our well-being. I'm going to start with Einstein. Einstein won a Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect. And what that means is that when there is light shone onto a material which is conductive or semiconductive, it generates a flow of electrons or energy, and it's the basis of how we have all of our solar power. So when light hits something that can channel energy, it will generate a charge. Now our bodies are actually conductive. If you think about what our bodies are made of, first of all, we're somewhere around the 60% or even more made up of water, our bodies, and water is highly conductive. As well as that, a very well-known scientist by the name of James Oshman put forward that we have a matrix of cellular material made out of connective tissue, which is formed in a type of lattice crystalline structure, which is highly, highly conductive to the passage of electrons or energy. And so this connective tissue, it's believed that it's actually one of the bases how the energy meridians in acupuncture might work. But we do have a lot of this conductive material in our body, so our body can actually transmit energy very easily. Also, the body needs power. It needs energy for it to work. And the brain needs approximately 25 watts of energy for it to function properly. And the whole body, including the brain, needs about 100 watts. That's a fair bit of power. When we don't have this energy, all sorts of cellular, biological, physiological functions just don't work. And it's when trouble begins, particularly in the brain. The brain is so hungry for energy. So if the brain doesn't have the energy it requires, it won't produce all the brain chemicals we need. We won't be able to think properly. We'll have emotions which are not healthy, uplifted emotions. Will be out of sorts, basically. So light is key, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. We basically have two major solar panels in our body. In other words, places where light can actually enter into our body and start circulating this energy. And they are the eyes and the skin. And they are so important. So with the eyes, when light actually strikes the eyes, it goes to the retina, and then it transfers to the optic nerve in forms of electrical patterns, and it will transmit to the brain. And the first place that actually goes to in the brain is a place called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is what we nickname the brain of the brain. It's super important. It sits at the center, and it sits above the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of all our hormones. So the hypothalamus needs light, and it's responsible for how fast or slow our brain waves go, for our circadian rhythms, how we sleep, how how our emotions are during the day, uplifted, our hormonal rate, how sensitive we are to pain, and a whole lot of other things. So first it gets the hypothalamus in the middle, and then it transmits to the back of the head where there's the visual cortex. And we get images there, but we don't actually make any sense of it. And then the light travels to the frontal part of the brain where our thinking process happen. That's the cerebrum, and that's when we start making sense of all the images. And then the next place it goes deep, deep into our brain, the center of the brain, which we call the limbic system, which is the emotional system. And it's been believed and thought that light coming through the limbic system is really necessary to be able to flush out emotions and feelings, give it balance. So in any case, light takes a long journey, a big journey through the brain, and it's really, really essential that we get that. So I'll talk a little bit more later about what might be going wrong, why we might not be getting light to the brain. So one of the reasons why we don't get light to the brain is actually due to something we call knocks to the head. When it comes to the brain requiring enough energy or light for it to function properly, there can be one very common problem that occurs to so many of us that is often not recognized, and that is knocks to the head. Now, most people would equate that to brain injury, but in fact, any small to medium knocks have a cumulative effect on the brain tissue. And what actually happens with time, there can be a type of almost swelling within the brain tissue, which occurs in certain parts. And that puts pressure on the fluid, which normally surrounds and protects the cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds and protects our brain. And when that happens, the optic nerve also receives a certain amount of pressure. It becomes desensitized, we don't see so clearly, and we can't relay the light signals coming through from our eyes as well into our brain. So you could say that in a sense, our brain becomes impoverished or malnourished of light. There's not enough actual light getting into the brain tissue. And this is why one type of light therapy known as syntonics, which is often used by behavioural optometrists, works really, really well. It's a form of enabling light to start recirculating through the eyes and re-establishing good, healthy flow throughout the brain tissue to bring about major psychological, emotional, behavioural and cognitive changes. It's a really phenomenal form of therapy, and I'll be touching on a therapy which is similar to that a little bit later on. So in any case, knocks to the head, it's something to watch out for, particularly if you've had a really major one. There may be a whole pattern of changes in behaviour and cognition afterwards, and I really urge you to look at light therapy as an effective way to re-establish the light back in circulation so that the brain function can work well again. Now, I hope you can hang in there with me a little bit, because I'm going to go a little bit sciencey now, but I'm going to aim to make it as easy to understand as possible. So, we have these amazing little powerhouses within our body, millions, billions of them within every cell of our body, and they are called mitochondria. I'm going to explain that a little bit. So, about 1.5 billion years ago, when supposedly humans didn't exist and there were only one-celled organisms living on the surface of the earth, there were also lots of bacteria. And there was a particular type of bacteria that evolved to end up merging itself within these one-cell structures, one-cellular organisms. So what happened is these bacteria infused into these one cells, and as these cells grew into multicellular bodies, which now we have these human bodies, it has evolved that these bacteria still exist in every single cell in our body, and these are the mitochondria. Now, what makes the mitochondria so special? It has been worked out that they're like our little batteries. They're our batteries that generate electricity. And the scientific word for it is ATP, adenotriphosphate. And basically everything in our body, absolutely every function, every possible function in our body is run by this ATP or this energy. Without it, basically our body just cannot exist. And what happens is that when ATP levels start to lower, we start to get problems in our body. That's when we start to get inflammation, we get tired, the brain doesn't function so well, it doesn't think so clearly, we get moody. So basically we need ATP. ATP is our life energy source of the body. So the mitochondria are absolutely key in this whole issue. So much so that there's been some really notable scientists, medical researchers, that have put forth a hypothesis that cancer is actually a problem related to not enough ATP in our body, which starts off a whole cellular reproduction system which has gone skew-if and gone off track. And by re-establishing healthy metabolism, healthy ATP, the body can normalise itself. Anyway, back to mitochondria. So the mitochondria, I just want to tell you where they are most prolific in our body. The highest concentration of these little mitochondria are placed inside our brain, surprise, surprise, in our chest, heart area, and in our eyes. And I'll just remind you that the eyes are virtually an extension of brain tissue. In other words, eyes are virtually brain tissue. So in any case, what we do to these parts of our body will really influence our mitochondria. So it's been discovered that certain things can alter the mitochondrial function, how much ATP they can produce for us. So one of the things that is really damaging to the mitochondria is stress. And that's not surprising. It's not only stress as in psychological, emotional stress, but it's stress. It might be extreme heat, or it might be extreme exercise, anything that's an accident, or anything that is considered a stress on our body also has detrimental effects on our little mitochondria, so they don't produce their ATP. Some of the things that have a beneficial effect on the mitochondria is light. Surprise, surprise again. Also, vibration. They're very sensitive to vibration and to sound, and also to temperature variables. In other words, very cold, very hot, or the interaction between the two. So anyway, that's a clue. Coming back to light again, how important light is for our mitochondria, for our energy. And one of the most well-known scientists who did very interesting progressive work on the field of light therapy, PhotoBiomodulation, it basically means like a low-level laser therapy, was Tina Karu from Russia. She found that specific monochromatic light and certain wavelengths really speed up and improve the effectiveness of the mitochondria's ability to produce more ATP. So that's fantastic to know that. That's a real key to our health, both mental, psychological and physical. Okay, so we've worked out that light is crucial to the development of our energy in our brain and body, so that we can keep our moods even and balanced, and so that we can also have plenty of energy. So what is it about light that's gone wrong for so many of us to be experiencing low mood and low energy? Well, I'm going to focus on 3 key areas, and I'm going to call it light hygiene. And if you imagine, we all are familiar with the term of junk food. Well, the same applies to light. There's junk light and there's wholesome, nourishing light. And we need to be re-educated on what is wholesome and nourishing for our body so that we can have more of that and less of the junk light. So the 3 main key areas that I'm going to hone in on where people have gone wrong with light. The first one is sunlight, not actually getting enough of the healthy sunlight. The second one is improper, unhealthy lights in our home, and I'll go through that. And the third one is overexposure to a certain type of light which is emanated from our computer screens or any sorts of technological screens. So they're the 3 main areas that I'm going to focus on now. And additional to that afterwards, I will be talking about some really unique, fantastic light therapies that can also have an amazing effect on our well-being, on our mood and on our energy. However, I want to stress that with these light therapies, they are only as effective as the process that we actually do to get the groundwork right, get the light hygiene and the food hygiene correct. If we can get the baseline fundamentals correct, then using light therapies, people just go through amazing, wonderful changes. I've experienced this. So it's not a magic fix-all bullet, the light therapies. That really needs to be combined with self-changes within the home, within the diet, and your own work, basically. Sunlight would have to be the most underrated, freely available nutrient that's available to us. It's also the most effective and potent way to normalize and balance our moods. One of the best ways to get a good night's sleep is to expose our skin to the sunlight. As I mentioned before, there is 2 areas where light is going to actually enter into our body. The first one is our eyes, and the second one is our skin. So, what my recommendation is, it's actually based on Jack Kruse's premises that we're getting 60% of our electrons, 60% of our energy coming from the earth and the sun, and only 34% from the food we eat. So we get up first thing in the morning as close as possible to the sunrise. And what scientists have actually found is that the early morning sun is filled with something called near-infrared light and also UVA light. Now, near-infrared light has really specific benefits. 2 of the great things that near-infrared will do is help the body generate more dopamine and melatonin. And it's very interesting that dopamine is now being recognized by scientists as the main brain chemical which is responsible for anti-anxiety and anti-depression rather than serotonin. That model is going out the door. So the sunlight gives us more dopamine, which is awesome for our mental health. As well as that, I mentioned melatonin. One of the best ways to get our circadian rhythm back into synchronization and to be able to sleep again at nighttime is to get that early morning sun, the near-infrared rays shining in on our eyes. So when you do go out in the sunlight, go barefoot, have your feet on the earth. See if you can take some of your clothes off so that you do have some skin exposed to the sunlight. don't wear sunglasses and look towards the sun, not directly into the sun, but probably about 15 degrees just below where the sun is. And stay out there for at least 15 minutes. Longer, if you like. I usually do sometimes my meditation, my yoga, or otherwise I'll just sit outside and have a cup of tea or think about gratitude for the day. But you can do lots of things. You can go outside and enjoy that early morning sunlight. And then when it comes to the middle of the day, say between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m, it's also important to get some sunlight then. That's full of the UVB rays, and UVB is essential for us to be able to make vitamin D in our body. And so what we're finding is lots of people are vitamin D deficient, hugely so. And even though many of them are taking supplements or different forms of vitamin D, they're finding that they're still not getting their levels up sufficient, and it's still not having the immune boosting effects that vitamin D is known to have. And the reason for that is that vitamin D needs to be activated. It needs to be sulfated by the sunlight. And most people will take it but not get out in the sunlight. So it's essential, if you want to get your vitamin D levels up, is to get out in the sunlight in the middle of the day. And one other little tip that I can say is avoid bright blue screens, technology screens, your computer or your phones, for about 2 to 3 hours after you wake up. Otherwise it will shut down all the good effects that you've just had the switch on in the brain from the sunlight. So make sure you don't neutralize that by blasting your brain and your eyes with this very bright blue light. So I'll get into that in a minute as well. The next area of light which I wanted to address is precisely that, all about screens, technological phones, screens, tablets, iPads, all those sorts of things. Now, it's coming out more and more in mainstream, which is fantastic, that these devices put out a very strong, high-lux blue light. And this blue light, it's very similar to a very, very strong, bright middle of the day sunlight. So we are born to go through these circadian rhythms that has low blue light in early morning and also late at night, and it only rises in the middle of the day. But what we're finding is that most people are exposing themselves to these blue screens early morning right through the night, and it's creating havoc in their brain chemistry. It makes people awake at night, it makes them nervous and agitated, it makes them not be able to generate enough of these antidepressant effects. And there is actually quite a lot of research out there to validate that these blue screens are really hazardous to our well-being, our brain chemistry. So what do? There are some great free resources out there that you can use to eliminate this problem. The first one that I'll mention is an app which is freely downloadable, free to everybody. It's called F.Lux. You can put it on your phone, you can put it on your tablets, you can put it on your computer. And basically what it will do, it will synchronize with your daylight rhythms so that at sunset there will be less blue coming through on the screen and a little bit more orange and red, which is the natural exposure of colours and light that our brain was geared for. So that's one very good one. Another one that I use, which is a little bit more sophisticated and it's a nominal price, is called Iris, I-R-I-S. That's also available at a very nominal cost. They're both excellent and I urge you to put them onto your devices. The third thing that I would recommend is actually to avoid certain hours of exposure to these screens. In other words, I just put into policy a bit of a rule for myself that I don't look at my mobile phone or computer before 8 a.m. in the morning. That's not only for my eyes and brain health, but it's also because I don't want to influence my mind with all the things that come, all the business and information that comes with screens. So a good rule of thumb is avoid screens up to 8 o'clock in the morning, and then again after 8 or so p.m. at night. And that way your brain chemistry can get adjusted to the morning and the evening rhythms more naturally. Another little tip that you can use is using amber-coloured glasses. They're also known as blue blocking glasses. So these glasses, you can actually wear them in the evening particularly, and a lot of people actually say when they put them on, even for just 20 minutes in the evening, they have a much better sleep. It's cutting out that bright blue, which normally in the middle of the day would be stimulating us to make us alive and active. So these blue blocking glasses are also another good method to put on when you're working on the computer, if you do have to work into the evening. One of the things that I love about Iris, the app, is that you can adjust the brightness of your computer screen. And that's the other thing to be mindful of, is not to have really bright lights blasting into your eyes, into your face late at night or early in the morning. It's not just the blue lights, but it's also the intensity of the light which disrupts the whole circadian rhythm. So once again, most computers should have a brightness control that you can adjust, or if you have one of these apps I've mentioned, you can adjust your brightness as well. The third area of light hygiene, as I said, is actually our lighting that we have in our own home. Now, I've been through a little bit of a transition myself with the lighting. I used to have the compact fluoro, the nice twirly ones in the ceiling. I always had the sense they weren't very nice or very good for me, but I never knew. And when I found out that I could actually get LEDs, that they were more economical, environmentally friendly, they would last a longer time, I fitted out my whole house with quite expensive LED lights. I went a bit further with my research, and maybe a year or two later I found out actually LED lights are not so good. And then I went full circle and came back to the good old original incandescent lighting, which is actually really hard to get these days because they eliminated it from the market, thinking that they were not sustainable for the environment because they use a little bit more energy. The reason why they use more energy is because they put out the infrared, near infrared end of the spectrum, which puts out that little bit of heat, which is exactly what we're missing out on when we're looking at fluoros or LEDs. So I'm going to actually just show you a little spectral graph which compares the different spectral emissions of wavelengths of light that come from different sources of light. We've got sunlight, which is really very even. It's a nice distribution of different wavelengths. Then we come to the LED lights, and we'll find that LEDs are very high in specific wavelengths, particularly the blue. And then we've got the fluoros. Again, there's spikes, there's areas that are very high in certain peaks but completely deficient in other areas, particularly the near-infrared end of the spectrum. And then we get back to the good old original incandescent lights, which also I should mention, halogen lights are very similar. They put out a much healthier, broader spectrum of emissions of wavelengths, and they have a really strong concentration of this near-infrared light. Near-infrared light has really beneficial effects on our whole body, and once again, as I mentioned before, the mitochondria, they are specifically tuned in to near-infrared light, that specific wavelength, and they need it for healthy functioning. If we deprive our mitochondria of this wavelength, they're not going to be happy. We're going to get tireder and tireder because the mitochondria are unable to function and put out their ATP energy that they're required to do. So whatever's going to put out a decent amount of near-infrared light is considered to be very healthy for you. So my recommendation is to go through your house and remove all your compact fluoros, particularly your compact fluoros. It's been shown that they also put out high mercury vapors. Another thing that I wanted to mention about LEDs, another good reason to get rid of LEDs if you've got them in your house, is they have something that's called flicker. Now, the modern form of lighting, which is LED, is based on a certain technology where there are very short successive pulsations. So the light is actually a frequency, it's a pulsating frequency. And fluoros do this too. And sometimes we've been aware of flicker in light, but the LEDs flicker at such a high rate that our eyes don't actually recognize that flicker, but on our physiology and in our brain, we still do register that there is flicker. And it's a very unnerving, unresting, disturbing effect on our brain and on our moods generally. So any light that has flicker is generally considered to be not very healthy. I purchased a little device called the Bee from Anadi Martel from Sensortech, who devised a method, a very inexpensive method with this little meter to test how much flicker there might be in your lights. So basically what we're wanting to do is to remove our LEDs, remove all our fluoros, and repurchase incandescent or halogen lights. And it's not that easy to get incandescents. You can sometimes get them through certain lighting stores, but most often where we've purchased ours from is actually online. And so you may need to look for them a little bit. The other form of lighting, which is really great to have at night time, is red lights. Now, red lights, I've noticed that in Bunnings, they actually have party globes that are incandescent and they're red. They're very inexpensive. You can put them into your little lampshades and they'll put out a nice red hue. It's not fantastic for reading, of course, but at night time you want to start getting your melatonin levels up and starting to relax a little bit more, and the red light is fantastic for doing that. So things such as firelight, candlelight, or soft dim lights, or even the Himalayan salt lamps are all excellent sources of light to have in your home at night time. It will really help you become sleepy and increase the melatonin production. Now that we've got the light hygiene aspect covered, let's look at some of the other aspects of how light can basically help our mood and our energy. I mentioned before light therapy. It's a new and growing area. It's taking traction and it's growing. So it's a very exciting area to explore and to research. So, coming to light therapies, there are a plethora of different techniques available. However, coming back to our original premises of looking how light can actually affect our metabolism and our body, there's two main areas. in which light enters, and that is through the eyes and through the skin. And that also goes basically for our light therapies. There are techniques, a whole group of methods that use the eyes as a way to affect especially the brain through the light coming through. And that's, when I say light, I'm not only referring to pure white light, but specific wavelengths, which means actually colours. And then there's also the skin, and there's another whole branch which is growing so fast called PhotoBiomodulation, and that's a huge word, but it used to be called laser therapy. And that was very confusing because a lot of people associated laser therapy with something that burns, something that surgeons and doctors do to burn out parts of our body that we don't need. However, low-level laser therapy or cold laser therapy was the term that was given for when light is given to the body through a laser which doesn't have any thermal or heating or damaging effects. So in other words, it's a lower power. Now, what happened in the progression of this low-level laser therapy, it originally started understanding that it was required to have Let me backtrack a little bit. Laser therapy is basically a type of light which has two specific qualities. Laser implies that the light is monochromatic, or you could also say narrow band. So it has within 10 to 15 nanometers of very strict narrow wave band width. So that's one quality of lasers, and the other quality is that it's coherent. In other words, all the waves of light are flowing in unison, so it's creating a coherent wave. Now, in the research that occurred, particularly with Tina Karu in Russia, she found that with lasers, they worked extremely well for all sorts of physiological conditions. However, she found it was the monochromatic light which was most important to get the desired effects. The coherency wasn't so important because once the coherency entered the skin, all the light would scatter. So in the progression of this, what happened was people started to realize that light could be delivered as a therapy through LEDs if it was monochromatic but didn't necessarily have the coherency of laser therapy. And this opened up a lot of doors, specifically because there are so many regulations, safety regulations based around using lasers, which prohibited a lot of people from using them. However, now that LEDs are used with a very narrow band of wavelengths, it's opened up the doors so that so many more people and practitioners, even the layperson at home, can use this type of therapy. So it's very available and accessible now. So let's look at photobiomodulation. Photobiomodulation is a new term that's been given to replace the old low-level laser therapy. So photobiomodulation basically uses two main wavelengths of light, and they are in the near-infrared and also the red wavelengths. And the reason why they're used is, once again, the research shows that they have the most affinity with tissue, with human tissue, to be able to bring about the sorts of changes that we're looking for. So what happens when these particular wavelengths enter through our skin? It affects the little mitochondria that I spoke about before in our cells, and it helps them to be able to make the Krebs cycle to generate more electricity, more ATP, more effectively. So basically the outcome is we have more energy. Because it creates more ATP, virtually any bodily function that you can think of benefits. So the way that photobiomodulation has progressed is in several different areas. One big area is in the facial beauty aesthetics industry, because this red light helps to regenerate collagen and skin tissue, giving it a younger, more regenerated effect. It's also used for wound healing, specifically for diabetic sores or injuries that are difficult to heal. There's a lot of research around that, showing the speeding of healing rate. The third area is for pain. So once again, it's very, very effective for pain and inflammation. Now, the fact that it can work on inflammation is phenomenal because, as I mentioned before, inflammation is now linked to virtually every chronic condition. So if we have a method now that can reduce inflammation, we're able to have significant effects on virtually all of the chronic conditions, and including depression, which is one of my main areas of interest to want to be able to help people. So there are lots of other uses for photobiomodulation, and one area that hasn't been explored very much, but it is growing in interest, is transcranial near-infrared therapy. And basically that's a lot of words, but all it really means is that the light is shining through the cranium, through the skull, to affect the brain tissue. Now, the near-infrared light has a specific quality, and that quality is very unique, that it penetrates very deeply into the body, much deeper than any of the other wavelengths can do. So for that reason, the near-infrared applied straight on the cranium has the ability to affect brain tissue, which is fantastic. As I mentioned before, there are so many conditions relating to a light deficiency in the brain. So this is one way we can actually get light into the brain to improve our cognitive abilities, our focus, our memory, our mood. And in fact, research studies are starting to come up now that show that near-infrared and transcranial therapy is being used very successfully for things like stroke, Parkinson's disease, particularly dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and brain injuries. So it's a very, very exciting area. And one more area that is even less explored, which I wanted to mention again, is that it has the potential to activate underactive thyroid by applying directly to the skin and thyroid area the photobiomodulation near-infrared light, so it will improve the function of the cells in that area. Now, once again, this is of great interest to me because I have an interest in depression, low mood, low energy, and we want to be able to help those people with a struggling thyroid. And one of the areas is possibly through this light therapies directly to the thyroid area. And I'm just going to put in a little bit of more information here about the thyroid. Coming back to Dr. Jack Kruse, who is the neurosurgeon, very well informed, he has a theory which I suspect may be correct, that one of the reasons why our rates, the incidence of autoimmune thyroid problems is rising so rapidly, so high, is because our thyroid tissue is constantly being bombarded with this very bright blue LED light from screens on the computers. And we're getting hours and hours, often we're not covered. And it's one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, that it's something you might think about doing when you're in front of the computer. Instead of being completely bare, you might want to put a scarf on. It may protect some of the adverse effects of the blue light computer radiation onto your skin. So have a think about that too. So coming back to the photobiomodulation, there's several ways that you can actually apply this. And one of my keen interests is to be able to enable people to help themselves. So rather than someone having to come to a clinic, receive treatment on a weekly, bi-daily, whatever basis, and pay quite a bit of money and time to do that. If you can actually do it in your own home with your own device, I think it's a very highly recommended way to go. I've been using some really innovative pads that were originally designed for horses and animals for injuries and pain and different types of problems like that. So the creator of these pads has now devised a completely new invention, which is like a type of a hood which covers the entire head and also the back of the neck and the thyroid, which opens up whole new doors to the area of transcranial near-infrared therapy, which I was just explaining about before, to be able to affect brain tissue. It's a very exciting area, and I do anticipate doing a little bit of research to see how much response we can actually get from irradiating the cranium for conditions like low mood, low focus, irritability, poor sleep. And I can tell you already now, through my own experimentation and through several others, that sleep is one of the first things that we notice changes when we use this red near-infrared light radiated on the brain. Sleep improves dramatically. So that's a very exciting progression. The second area that I was speaking about, the manner in which light therapies can be actually applied to the body, is via the eyes. Now, I could speak all day, for probably many days, about the many different ways that light therapies can be applied. It's a very exciting area, but I do need to limit what I'm presenting to you today. So I'm just going to touch in on my favourites. So coming back to the eyes and being able to affect brain tissue, and not only brain tissue but the whole blood circulation system through irradiating the eyes, there's several factors to keep in mind. First of all, we don't want anything too bright that's going to shock the eyes or damage the eyes. And secondly, where possible, we want to maximize effect by getting monochromatic light. And monochromatic light basically means the very pure colors. It's not to say that polychromatic doesn't work. In fact, I've seen awesome results using polychromatic pulsating lights in certain systems like the Sensora. However, this particular system I'm talking about uses specifically the eyes to bring about changes in the mood. And I'll just tell you a little story of my own experience to give you a bit of background. At my very first International Light Association conference, I experienced a form of light therapy that was being demonstrated and exhibited, and it was something by the name of the Monocrom Dome. And I had absolutely no pre-knowledge of what it could do, what it was meant to do, and it was just a really short period of a session. It was maybe 10 minutes long. And so I experienced it. I'll show you the picture here, which is basically a dome which sits over a person's head, and the dimensions of the dome are created in a sense that when you're inside, there's a sense of spacelessness. It's called the Gunsfeld effect. So you actually don't feel closed in at all. It's the opposite. You feel as if it's very expansive when the dome is over your head. The purpose of the therapy is for the person to actually choose their own desired colours. The premise is that each person knows individually, intrinsically, which colours are best suited for their metabolism, and that can be felt experientially when they're actually under the dome. So there's a console which can be turned around so that you can select basically whichever colours or wavelengths feel most appropriate or most pleasing. So I had a 10-minute session, and after the session, I have to say that I was actually quite disorientated. The reason being was that I had so much joy, so much elation, so much lightness. It was almost like what I would imagine a very good drug experience would be like. And it was so strong that I found it hard to focus for the next hour or two on any of the other presentations. And what I had noticed too, that after that particular session, prior to that, I had actually had some form of mild to moderate depression, and which I had been struggling with and wasn't able to shake off. But after that session, to this day, actually, I haven't had any more depression to that extent. Of course, there have been dips, but never to that extent. And I was so flabbergasted with the results that I received from that. It was almost too good to be true that I decided that I needed and I wanted to be able to bring this particular method out to Australia, because it is quite rare, and be able to do some research testing, some case studies to see if similar results could be reproduced for people with mood disorders. So that's what I did after quite a bit of saving up and preparation. I did actually conduct a study with a small group of people, about 10 people, all with differing mood conditions, and I did quite rigorous testing. And each person had 5 sessions over a period of approximately 4 months. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but it's a very concentrated form of light. The results which came from that study were really surprising, very pleasing also. I found, because I studied both brain function according to Dr. Daniel Amen's system. It's a questionnaire system looking at 5 different parts of the brain. What I found, all areas responded favourably, in other words, improved by the end of the period. The one area that improved the most was the limbic brain, which is to do with deep emotional responses. I gave these people no other interventions, it was just purely light therapy. And when it came to looking at the different moods and seeing how people responded, the 2 areas that people responded best in were fatigue levels and depression levels. So we had 70% of the people decrease quite significantly their depression symptoms, and also 70% of people who had an increase significantly of their energy levels. I did look at anxiety and sleep and nervous tension, and one of the things that also I looked at with quite favourable results was mental clarity and memory. So that was probably the 3rd best response out of all the parameters that I was studying. So in any case, I have to say that I've used this Monocrom Dome extensively since then, and I haven't studied them in the same very systematic and diligent manner that I did with the original study, but I have witnessed really amazing changes in people's lives. And I don't want to be that bombastic to actually say that light therapy did all of this, but what I have noticed that a lot of people, after they started several sessions of light therapy, they seem to generate the courage, less fear, the ability to go forward, making life changes, big life changes. And again, it's still early days, but I have been so pleasantly surprised and pleased with the results of this therapy that it is really my mission to get it out to as many people as possible. And I just want to add here that I have noticed that some people respond a lot more favourably than others to this particular therapy. I've asked the question quite a few times, why could that be? And I think that one of the reasons is now, after a long period, is that some people do the homework, the groundwork, which enables them to fly more easily with the light therapy. And what I mean by that is there are certain things you can do at home that create the foundation to create really good change. And the two biggest things are eating a pure diet, a diet which is an anti-inflammatory diet. And the other thing is doing your home mental consciousness, mindfulness work, which can be done in the form of meditation, observing thoughts, journaling, all sorts of things. So the mind work and the dietary work, and probably the third one would be being physically active. If people have got those three things in place, the light therapy just springs forward people to the places and the spaces that they desire to go to. That's my experience, and I really need to share this with the world, and it's part of the reason why I'm producing this video. So that's very exciting. And so they're my two favourite light therapy systems which I currently use. However, it's not limited to that, and I will very, very briefly mention a third one, which I am just beginning to use, which works on a slightly different basis. It comes back down to pulsations and frequencies. And this particular system is called brain entrainment, audio-visual brain entrainment. And basically, it's a set of glasses and headphones that have a synchronized set of pulsations going through at a rhythmic pace, which the brain sees and hears, and very easily and very quickly starts to synchronize and go in resonance with that pulse. Now, this is very exciting because it means that we can take people into very deep, relaxed theta brainwave states or relaxed alpha brainwave states, or if people are too relaxed and too deficient and lethargic, we can give them higher levels, beta, and possibly even low gamma levels. So this is a whole nother area. It's a form of almost self-hypnosis, and I'm experimenting with producing very beautiful self-meditation, visualization MP3s, which can be played through at the same time as having these audio-visual entrainment happening. So whatever you're listening to, whatever your messages you're giving to your brain at that time, if you're in that very deep, relaxed state, those messages will penetrate deeply and very well. What I have noticed using this system is that most people go to sleep very quickly, probably within 5 minutes of having the system on, which is fantastic. And if you manage to stay alert and awake through the whole system, then most people are very calm and chilled afterwards. So this is another application of light therapy. It's a slightly different method, but again, it has fantastic research. Dave Seaver is the creator and the researcher of the particular system that I use, which is called Mind Alive. He has a plethora of great research material on his website, and I highly recommend you having a look at it. There's research for people with depression, with anxiety, with stress, with ADD, with Alzheimer's. He's getting really good responses. So together, those three techniques of light therapy form a very healthy, comprehensive basis to help people come back to a state of really even energy levels and also mood levels. And I wish to invite you to explore this further, both on your own, but if you're interested in this, to approach me, talk to me. I'm in the phase of developing programs that enables people to have these systems in their own home so that they can do their own work at home without needing to spend lots of money or time going out to other places to seek it. So thank you so much for watching this, and please do ask me any questions. You can email me, you can Facebook me on Limbic Light. Yes, you can You can make connection with me. I'd be delighted to answer your questions. Thank you very much.